A weekend in Florence, it's simply an excellent plan. But what about a weekend in Florence following the footsteps of one of the most important Italian artists, Michelangelo Buonarroti? This is a complete itinerary for your weekend in the town, discovering art and life of Michelangelo. According to this itinerary, you arrive to the city on Friday afternoon and you depart on Sunday after lunch. What to see in Florence during a weekend dedicated to Michelangelo Buonarroti? An itinerary looking for the footsteps of Michelangelo in Florence will bring you to some of the most famous and important museums in the city, like the Galleria dell'Accademia, where you can see the original statue of David, sculpted by the young artist. At the same time, you will also discover the little-known, often forgotten sites like Casa Buonarroti or the Bargello Museum, where you will learn about the ambitions, projects, plans of Michelangelo. You will also discover his relationship with the Medici family at the Chapelle Medici, and at the end you can also pay tribute to Michelangelo at his tomb in Santa Croce. Come with me, let's discover the life and work of Michelangelo in Florence. If you decided to follow Michelangelo's footsteps in Florence, the best place where to start your weekend on Friday afternoon is the Piazzale Michelangelo. The Piazzale Michelangelo is a panoramic terrace, part of a panoramic avenue, the so-called Viale dei Colli, designed during the 1860s by the Florentine architect Giuseppe Poggi. The Piazzale was dedicated to the most famous Italian artist and decorated with the copies of Michelangelo's works. Today you can see in the square the bronze copy of David and the 4 allegories from the new sacristy. Today, the Piazzale Michelangelo is the most popular viewing point on the center of Florence, where you can take the magnificent pictures of the city. Saturday morning, you can start your adventure with Michelangelo's art inside of Bargello. The collection of the museum holds the Bacchus, the statue from the early years of the artist's activity, made in 1497 during the first stay in Rome. Michelangelo went to Rome as a consequence of a fraud. Cardinal Riario, the most important collectioner of Roman antiquities, bought one of Michelangelo's works, Sleeping Cupid, as a Roman original. Only later on he understood he was actually cheated at, but he wanted to meet with this genius artist who managed to actually mislead his expert's eye. Michelangelo, with the Bacchus, for the first time tried to copy the models of the Roman statues representing the classical deities. The collection of the Bargello includes other masterpieces by the artist, like the Tondo Pitti, the David Apollo, or the portrait of Brutus. The Bargello is the most important sculpture museum in the world, and therefore in the museum you will admire also other masterpieces like the bust of Costanza Bonarelli by Bernini, the Perseus by Giambologna, Bronze David by Donatello, and The Lady with the Flowers by Verrocchio. After the visit at the Bargello, you can go to the Galleria dell'Accademia to see the original statue of David. David doesn't need an introduction. It's the most iconic work made by Michelangelo. It was commissioned by the Cathedral authorities, and the statue was supposed to decorate the church. Michelangelo worked at David between 1501 and 1504, and when he revealed the statue to the public, the Florentine people simply fell in love. The allegory of young David winning against the powerful enemy Goliath became for Florence the allegory of their political battle and the struggle with the Medici family. And this is why the people of Florence decided to place David here in Piazza della Signoria as the symbol of the Republican virtue. At the Accademia Gallery you will also see the four prisons by Michelangelo, his unfinished work designed probably for the tomb of the Pope Julius II. The tomb of the Pope was the most troubled project Michelangelo engaged into. He worked at it for 40 years. The very ambitious project was reduced year by year, and many statues were left unfinished. The four prisons that are displayed at the Accademia today were found after Michelangelo's death in his deposits of marbles here in Florence. They were donated by Michelangelo's family to the Medici, and the Medici placed them at the Boboli Gardens. After lunch, you can discover Santa Croce neighborhood where Michelangelo's family used to live. Here, in fact, you can visit Casa Buonarroti, the palace built already after the death of the artist, in part thanks to his earnings. The construction started in 1612. This new magnificent residence for the Buonarrotis was supposed to glorify the memory of the famous artist. The main room of the palace is decorated with the scenes representing the life of Michelangelo. The decorations were made by the best artists active at that time in Florence. In the collection of the museum, you will also find some of the artworks from the very first years of Michelangelo's artistic activity, the Madonna with the staircase and the Battle of the Centaurs. You can end this day inside of Santa Croce at Michelangelo's tomb. Michelangelo died in Rome on the 18th of February 1564, 3 weeks before his 19th birthday. He wanted to be buried in Rome because Florence, in the meantime, became the capital of the Duchy of Tuscany, ruled by Cosimo I from the Medici family, and Michelangelo didn't feel at home here anymore. But Cosimo I had a different idea. He wanted to use Michelangelo's death for the promotion of his own rule. So he convinced Michelangelo's nephew to bring the body of the artist to Florence. The Medici organized the artist's funeral at San Lorenzo, their church, their most important church, and the funeral lasted 2 days. The body of the artist was then buried in Santa Croce in the parish church of the Buonarroti family. The tomb was designed by Giorgio Vasari, the main artist working for the Duke. While you're inside the basilica, remember to find also the tombs of other famous Italians like Galileo or Machiavelli. Enter the Bardi and the Medici Chapels to look at Giotto's frescoes, and go to the sacristy where you will find the painted crucifix by Cimabue, hardly damaged during the last flood of Florence. After your breakfast in the morning, you can continue your adventure with Michelangelo by visiting the Medici Chapels. Inside this funerary complex, you will see the so-called new sacristy, a funerary chapel designed by Michelangelo for the two popes from the Medici family, Leo X and Clement VII. Inside this chapel, Michelangelo placed the tombs of the two members of the family who were the first ones to receive the ducal titles: Lorenzo, Duke of Urbino, and Giuliano, Duke of Nemours. Michelangelo designed the architecture of the space and its sculptural decoration. The tombs represent the two dukes sitting above their sarcophagi with the allegories of the different moments of the day that correspond to the different characters of the two personalities of the dukes. This is definitely one of the most complex projects by Michelangelo that beautifully joins architecture and sculpture. After the visit at the Medici Chapels, you can meet with Michelangelo inside of the Cathedral Museum. Museo dell'Opera del Duomo. The collection includes the Bandini Pietà, one of the very last works sculpted by Michelangelo, started as a statue that Michelangelo wanted to place on his own tomb. The statue expresses intimate emotions and Michelangelo's faith. In fact, in the face of Nicodemus, who supports Jesus, Michelangelo placed his own self-portrait. Unfortunately, the marble chosen for this work resulted to be very hard, and Michelangelo had difficulties in actually working in it. One day, he simply took a hammer and, full of frustration, started to damage the work. The statue was bought by Francesco Bandini and restored by a young sculptor who was hired by Bandini with a task to restore the statue. Later on, this work was bought by the Grand Duke of Tuscany, Cosimo III, who placed this work inside of the Cathedral of Florence, and then the statue reached to the museum collection. Inside of the museum you can also admire the bronze door from the baptistry, the sculptural decoration for the bell tower, the silver altar dedicated to St. John the Baptist, and Donatello's Mary Magdalene. After the lunch break and a bit of shopping, you can conclude your weekend in Florence. How much it may cost to pass a weekend in Florence? The prices depend on the period of the year when you decide to visit the city. The cheapest months are November, December, January, February and March. A double room in a three-star hotel can cost you during the winter about €100. In the high season, between April and October, the same room costs about €150. A lunch, it's a cost of about 25-30 euros per person, and a three-course dinner costs about 40-45 euros per person. What to do in Florence during your free time from museum visits? First of all, you have to do some shopping. Florence is famous for its leather workshop, goldsmiths shops, and some important fashion brands. During your free time you have to try some of the typical Tuscan dishes like the Florentine steak, ribollita, panzanella, pappa al pomodoro. As an aperitivo, you cannot miss the famous Negroni, a typically Florentine drink created for the Count Negroni, who used to order in Caffè Casoni his Americano with gin instead of seltz. These are the things you can do in your free time. Do you want to follow Michelangelo's footsteps during a guided tour in Florence? Contact me. I will be happy to organize your custom itinerary.